The ashes that breathed. The mountain had been burning for 3 days. Not the kind of fire that warmed hands or cooked food, not the kind that crackled cheerfully in hearths or danced beneath iron pots. This fire was alive in a way that made men uneasy. It roared and surged, devoured stone, and spat smoke so thick it blotted out the sky. From miles away, the mountain looked like a wound in the world, bleeding flame and ash into the heavens. The villagers had fled on the first night. By the second, even the bravest hunters and stubborn elders had abandoned their homes. No one argued, no one stayed behind to salvage belongings. They knew what the signs meant. When a dragon's mountain burned like that, something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. By the third day, there was no one left within sight of the mountain. No one, except one man. Kale pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, though it did little to keep out the heat. The fabric was already scorched in places, its edges curled and brittle. Ash clung to it, coating it in a dull gray that made him look like a ghost wandering through a dying world. Every breath scraped his throat raw. The air tasted of smoke and something else, something metallic and bitter, like blood baked into stone. He paused on a ridge overlooking the mountain, squinting through the haze. Still burning, he muttered. Of course it was. Fires like this didn't simply go out. Not when dragons were involved. Kale adjusted the strap of the satchel slung across his chest, though it was nearly empty now. The letters he had been carrying were long since delivered or abandoned, depending on how one chose to look at it. His job had been simple: carry messages, avoid danger, get paid. Stay alive. He let out a humorless laugh. Well, he said to no one, half of that's going great. The smart thing, the sane thing, would have been to turn around, to follow the others down into the valley and keep going until the mountain was nothing but a distant memory. But he hadn't done that, because he had heard something. It had been faint, so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination. A sound carried on the wind, slipping between the roar of the flames and the rumble of collapsing rock. A cry, small, weak, desperate. Kale closed his eyes briefly, as if he could shut the memory out. It hadn't worked then. It didn't work now. A hatchling, he whispered. He had heard dragons before from a distance. Everyone had. Their roars echoed for miles, deep and thunderous, shaking the bones of those who listened. But this had been different. Fragile, terrified, and alone. Kale opened his eyes and stared at the burning mountain. You're an idiot, he told himself. The wind howled in agreement, sending a fresh wave of ash swirling around him. He could still turn back. No one would know. No one would blame him. No one would even expect him to try. He took a step forward. Yeah, he sighed, definitely an idiot. The climb was worse than he expected. The ground was unstable, shifting beneath his boots as if the mountain itself was trying to shake him off. Cracks split the earth in jagged lines, glowing faintly with heat from deep below. In some places, molten rock oozed to the surface, pooling in sluggish, deadly rivers. Kale kept his distance from those. He was that much of an idiot. The closer he got, the worse the air became. Breathing felt like inhaling fire, each gasp burning his lungs. Sweat soaked his clothes, stinging his eyes and mixing with ash until everything tasted like salt and soot. Still, he kept going. Because every now and then, when the wind shifted just right, he heard it again. A thin, broken sound. Crying. By the time he reached the entrance to the cavern, his legs were shaking. It yawned before him like the mouth of some enormous beast, its edges blackened and cracked. Smoke poured out in thick, rolling waves, carrying with it a heat so intense it felt like a physical force pressing against him. Kale stopped just outside. This, he said hoarsely, is a terrible idea. The cavern did not argue. It simply waited. He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, to put as much distance between himself and that place as possible. Because this wasn't just any cave. This was a dragon's lair. And dragons did not tolerate intruders. If anything inside was still alive, he wouldn't stand a chance. Kale swallowed hard. The crying came again. Closer now. Weaker. His jaw tightened. Damn it. And before he could change his mind, he stepped inside. The world changed the moment he crossed the threshold. The roar of the wind faded, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the distant crackle of fire and the occasional groan of shifting stone. The heat was worse here. Much worse. It wrapped around him, clinging to his skin, seeping into his bones. Every breath felt thick, heavy, as if the air itself resisted being drawn into his lungs. Kale pulled the cloth over his mouth tighter and pressed forward. His boots crunched against debris, shattered stone, broken crystal, fragments of something darker. He glanced down and immediately wished he hadn't. Scales, burned, broken. Some of them were as large as his hand, their surfaces dulled and cracked. Others were smaller, jagged pieces scattered like shattered glass. Kale's stomach twisted. Gods, he whispered. He stepped over them carefully, his movements slow, cautious. The cavern opened up as he moved deeper, expanding into a vast chamber that made him feel impossibly small. The ceiling arched high above, disappearing into shadow. The walls glimmered faintly, veins of crystal catching what little light filtered through the smoke. Once, it must have been beautiful. No, it was a ruin. Claw marks scarred the stone, deep gouges that spoke of immense strength and violence. Entire sections of the wall had collapsed, leaving jagged openings that bled heat and light from deeper within the mountain. And everywhere, there were signs of battle. Kale's grip tightened on the knife at his side. What happened here? He had heard stories of dragons fighting, territorial disputes, rivalries that spanned centuries. But this wasn't a fight. This was slaughter. The crying came again. Closer. Kale turned toward the sound. He found them at the far end of the caverns. And stopped. Because for a moment, his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. She was enormous. Even lying still, even broken and dying, the dragon commanded the space around her. Her body stretched across the cavern floor like a fallen mountain, her golden scales dulled by ash and blood. Wounds covered her. Deep, jagged gashes that had torn through scale and flesh alike. One of her wings lay twisted at an unnatural angle, the membrane shredded, bone exposed. The other was gone. Severed. Kale's breath hitched. No one survives that, he whispered. And yet, she had. Long enough. Her head rested against the stone, her massive jaw slack. Smoke curled faintly from her nostrils, each breath shallow, uneven. Dying. Kale took an involuntary step back. This was wrong. All of it. He shouldn't be here. If she was still alive. If she had even a fraction of her strength left. He would be dead before he could even turn around. The dragon's eye flickered open and locked onto him. Kale froze. Time seemed to stretch, every second dragging into eternity as those vast, ancient eyes held him in place. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't even think. He was going to die. He knew it. There was no fighting something like this, no outrunning it, no bargaining with it. He had walked into a dragon's lair. And now, he would pay for it. The dragon exhaled. A weak, ragged sound that echoed through the cavern. And then, slowly, she lowered her head. Not in attack. Not in warnings. But in something else. Something Kale never thought he would see from a creature like her. Submission. Kale blinked. What? The dragon's gaze shifted. Not away from him, but past him, toward something behind her. Or rather, beneath her. Kale frowned, his fear momentarily overridden by confusion. He followed her gaze and saw them. Two small shapes huddled beneath the curve of her body. Hatchlings. They were tiny compared to her, barely larger than dogs. Their scales were still soft, not yet hardened into the impenetrable armor of adulthood. One was crimson, its color deep and rich even beneath the soot. The other was silver, its scales faintly luminous, catching what little light there was and reflecting it back in a soft glow. They were trembling. Curled tightly together, their small bodies pressed close, as if trying to draw warmth from one another. And they were crying. The sound Kale had heard. Thin, broken, desperate. His chest tightened. No, he looked back at the dragons. At her wounds. At the way she watched him, not with anger, but with something far more human. Please. The word wasn't spoken, but he felt it all the same. Kale shook his head, stepping back. I can't, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I can't do this. This was madness. Absolute madness. You didn't interfere with dragons. You didn't involve yourself in their affairs. You especially didn't take their young. That was how people died. Horribly. The dragon blinked slowly. Her head lowered further, pressing against the stone with a heavy, final weight. Her breathing hitched. Once, twice, and then, stilled, silence, complete and absolute. Kale stared at the massive, unmoving form, at the eyes that no longer held light, at the creature that had once been a force of nature, now reduced to stillness. Gone. The hatchlings whimpered softly. Kale closed his eyes. Damn it. He didn't move at first. Couldn't. Because the weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like the mountain itself. If he walked away, they would die. If he stayed, he might die. Either way, there would be consequences. Kale let out a slow, shaky breath. I hate this, he muttered, and stepped forward. The hatchlings noticed him immediately. The crimson one let out a weak hiss, a tiny puff of smoke escaping its mouth. The silver one did not move, its glowing eyes fixed on him with an intensity that felt far too aware for something so small. It's okay, Kale said softly, crouching down. I'm not here to hurt you. They didn't understand his words. Of course they didn't. But maybe, just maybe, they would understand his intent. He reached out slowly. The crimson hatchling flinched, pressing closer to its sibling. The silver one shifted slightly, placing itself between Kale and the other. Protective. Even now. Kale felt something twist in his chest. You're both going to die if you stay here, he said quietly, and I'm apparently too stupid to leave you. He hesitated. Just for a moment. Then, he picked them up. They were warm. Too warm. Heat radiated from their small bodies, far beyond what should have been normal. Fever. Severe. Kale's expression darkened. Yeah, that's not good. The crimson hatchling whimpered weakly, its head lolling against his arm. The silver one remained still, watching him, its gaze unblinking. Trusting. Or perhaps accepting. Kale swallowed hard. All right, he said softly, let's get you out of here. Behind him, the cavern groaned. The first tremor was subtle. So subtle Kale almost missed it. The ground shifted slightly beneath his feet, a low, rumbling sound echoing through the stone. He froze. No, another tremor. Stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling, drifting down in soft, gray clouds. Kale looked up. Cracks spread across the stone above, thin lines that widened with every passing second. The cavern was collapsing. Of course it is, he said, his voice tight. Why wouldn't it be? He adjusted his grip on the hatchlings, holding them closer. Guess we're leaving right now. And then, he ran. The world became chaos. Stone fell from above, crashing against the ground with deafening force. The path he had taken in was no longer clear, debris blocking his way, forcing him to weave through narrow gaps and unstable ground. The heat intensified, waves of it surging through the cavern as if the mountain itself was breathing its last. Kale's lungs burned. His vision blurred. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if he did, they would all die. Almost there, he gasped, though he had no idea if it was true, just a little further. The ground gave way beneath him. Kale stumbled, nearly falling as the stone cracked and shifted. He caught himself at the last second, clutching the hatchlings tightly against his chest. Not today, he growled. He pushed forward. The entrance came into view. Light, fresh air, freedom. The ceiling above it cracked. A massive slab of stone broke free, plummeting downward. Kale surged forward. Vaster, vaster. The stone hit the ground behind him with a thunderous crash. And Kale burst out of the cavern. Just as the entrance collapsed, he stumbled to a stop, collapsing to his knees as he sucked in a ragged breath. Cool air filled his lungs. Not clean, not entirely, but better. So much better. He coughed, his body shaking with the force of it. The hatchlings whimpered softly in his arms. Kale looked down at them, at the two tiny lives he had just risked everything for. "What have I done?" he whispered. He didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure he wanted one. High above him, the clouds shifted. For a brief moment the smoke parted, and something moved behind it. Vast, silent, watching. Kale's breath caught. "No," he said quietly. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The weight of flames. The hatchlings should have died. Kale knew that as surely as he knew the feel of a blade in his hand or the ache of tired bones after a long journey. He had seen enough of the world to understand its rules. Weak things didn't survive. Not in burning mountains. Not in a world that feared dragons. And certainly not without a mother. Yet somehow, against reason, against nature, they lived. The first night had nearly killed them. Kale had barely made it down the mountain before the hatchlings' condition worsened. Their already fragile breathing became shallow, uneven, as if each breath required more effort than the last. The crimson one, he had started calling it Ember in his head, though he wasn't sure why, burned with fever. Not warmth, not heat, but something deeper, more dangerous. Its small body radiated an intense, unnatural temperature, as though a fire raged beneath its scales, threatening to consume it from the inside out. The silver one lumen Kale had decided was different. Still warm, but not burning. Its glow had dimmed, the faint radiance of its scales flickering like a dying lantern. Its breathing was steadier than its sibling, but there was a tightness to it, a strain that spoke of hidden weakness. They were both dying. Slowly, inevitably. Kale had known it the moment he picked them up. And yet, he refused to accept it. He found shelter in a shallow cave at the base of the mountain. It wasn't much, just a hollow carved into the rock by time and wind, but it was enough to shield them from the worst of the ash that still fell from above. Kale gathered what little he could find. Dry branches, shriveled moss, anything that might burn. It took him 3 tries to get a fire going. His hands shook too much. His breath came too fast. Every time he glanced at the hatchlings, fear tightened its grip around his chest. "Stay with me," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to them or himself. When the fire finally caught, it felt like a small victory. A fragile one, but something. Kale crouched beside it, the hatchlings curled in the crook of his arm, their small bodies pressed close for warmth, or perhaps comfort. He didn't know which. Maybe both. "All right," he said quietly, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Think." He had no experience with dragons. None. No one did. Those who claimed otherwise were either liars or dead. But he had seen animals. He had cared for injured creatures before, nothing like this, nothing so dangerous, but the principles were the same. Warmth, water, food. He could manage that. Maybe. The water skin at his side was half full. Not enough, but it would have to do. He carefully dripped a few drops onto his fingers and brought them to Ember's mouth. The hatchling didn't respond. Its body was too hot. Too still. "Come on," Kale whispered, "drink." "Nothing." Kale clenched his jaw. "Don't do this," he muttered, "not after everything." Lumen shifted. The silver hatchling let out a soft, insistent chirp, nudging its sibling's side with its snout. Again, and again. Persistent. Refusing to give up. Ember stirred. Barely. Its mouth opened slightly, just enough for Kale to slip a drop of water inside. A moment passed. Then, a weak swallow. Kale exhaled sharply, relief flooding through him. "That's it," he said softly. "That's it, stay with me." He repeated the process, one drop at a time, until Ember had taken what little it could. Then he turned to Lumens. The silver hatchling accepted the water more easily, though its eyes never left Kale's face. Watching, always watching, as if trying to understand him. Food was harder. Kale had nothing suitable for hatchlings. Nothing soft enough. Nothing small enough. He stared at the strip of dried meat in his hand, then at the tiny, fragile creatures beside him. "This is ridiculous," he said under his breath. He tore off a piece, chewing it until it softened, then carefully offered it to Ember. The hatchling barely reacted. Lumen nudged it again. Encouraging. After a long moment, Ember swallowed. Just a little. But enough. Kale let out a shaky laugh. "All right," he said, "we're not dead yet." The second day was worse. Because survival meant reality had time to catch up. Kale woke to the sound of Ember's weak, pained whimpers. The fever hadn't broken. If anything, it had grown worse. The hatchling's body was so hot now that it was almost painful to touch. Kale frowned, running a hand through his hair. "Too much heat," he muttered. That didn't make sense. They were creatures of fire. Heat should help them, shouldn't it? But Ember wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. Kale looked at the fire, at the way the flames danced, casting flickering shadows against the cave walls. Then back at the hatchling. Or maybe not. Carefully, he moved Ember away from the fire, placing it on a patch of cooler stone. The hatchling let out a soft, weak sound, shifting slightly. Lumen followed immediately, pressing close to its sibling, its glow dim but steady. Kale watched them for a moment, then nodded. Worth a try. Hours passed. Slow, painful. Every moment felt stretched, filled with uncertainty. Kale did what he could. Water, food, keeping the fire low, keeping the hatchlings close. And slowly, very slowly, Ember's breathing began to change. Still weak, still uneven, but no longer as strained. Kale leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion settling into his bones. "Okay," he whispered, "okay, that's something." Lumen chirped softly, almost approving. Kale huffed a tired laugh. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "I'm making this up as I go." Lumen tilted its head, unimpressed. By the third day, they were still alive. Barely, but alive. And that was enough to keep Kale going. He left the cave at dawn. He didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at him to stay. To guard them. To keep them close where he could see them. But they needed more than he had. More waters. More food. And if he stayed, they would die anyway. "I'll be back," he said, crouching beside them. Lumen watched him. Ember slept. "I mean it," Kale added. "Don't burn the place down while I'm gone." Lumen blinked. Kale sighed. "Yeah, that was a bad joke." He hesitated. Then, carefully, he reached out and brushed a hand lightly over Lumen's head. The hatchling stilled. Didn't pull away. Didn't react at all. Just watched. Kale swallowed. "Stay alive," he said quietly. And then, he left. The forest at the base of the mountain was eerily silent. Not empty, but quiet in a way that felt wrong. No birds. No insects. Nothing. As if everything living had fled from whatever had happened above. Kale moved quickly, his senses on edge. He wasn't alone. He could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes. Watching. Waiting. He pushed the feeling aside. Focused. Water first. He found a small stream not far from the cave, its clear flow cutting through the ash-covered ground like a lifeline. Kale dropped to his knees beside it, filling his water skin and drinking deeply. The cool water eased the burn in his throat, clearing his mind just enough to think. Food next. He scanned the area. Berries, roots, anything edible. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he worked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Closer. Kale's hand drifted to his knife. I know you're there, he said quietly. Silence. Then, a branch snapped. Kale turned. They stepped out of the trees one by one. 5 of them. Armed. Armored. Hunters. Kale's stomach dropped. Of course. Of course it would be hunters. Drawn by the smoke. By the promise of dragon remains. Scales. Bones. Anything they could sell. Their eyes locked onto him. Then, narrowed. Well, one of them said, a grin spreading across his face. Looks like we're not the only ones with good instincts. Kale didn't move. Didn't speak. Because there was nothing he could say that would make this better. You came from the mountain, another said, didn't you? Kale stayed silent. The first man stepped forward. Slow. Confident. Tell us what you found, he said, and maybe we'll let you walk away. Kale met his gaze. And knew. That was a lie. I didn't find anything, Kale said evenly. The hunter's smile widened. Wrong answer. He drew his blade. The others followed. 5 against 1. Kale's grip tightened on his knife. He wasn't a fighter. Not really. He knew how to defend himself. How to survive. But this wasn't a fight he could win. Not head-ons. He needed to move. Needed to get back to the cave. To the hatchlings. Before these men found them. Kale took a slow step back. Last chance, the hunter said. Kale didn't wait. He ran. After him. The shout echoed through the trees as Kale sprinted forward, his boots pounding against the ash-covered ground. Branches tore at his clothes. Roots threatened to trip him. But he didn't slow down. Couldn't. Because if they caught him, if they followed him back, Ember and Lumen would die. An arrow whistled past his ear. Another struck the ground at his feet. Kale veered sharply to the left, weaving through the trees, trying to break their line of sight. He could hear them behind him. Getting closer. Too close. Cut him off, someone shouted. Kale's heart pounded. Think. He couldn't outrun them. Not like this. He needed a distraction. Something. Anything. His gaze darted around. Then, he saw it. The cliff. And below it. The river. Kale changed direction. He burst out of the trees and skidded to a stop at the edge of the cliff. The drop was steep. Dangerous. But survivable. Maybe. Behind him. The hunters emerged. Weapons drawn. Smiling. Nowhere left to run, one of them said. Kale's grip tightened. Yeah, he said quietly, that's what I was thinking. And then, he jumped. The fall knocked the breath from his lungs. The impact with the water was brutal, the cold shock sending a jolt through his entire body. Kale fought to stay conscious, kicking toward the surface. He broke through, gasping for air. The current caught him immediately, dragging him downstream. He didn't fight it. Couldn't. He let it carry him, focusing on staying afloat, on breathing, on surviving. After what felt like an eternity, the current slowed. Kale dragged himself onto the bank, coughing, his body trembling with exhaustion. He lay there for a long moment, staring up at the sky. Still alive, he muttered. Then, he pushed himself up. Because he wasn't done yet. The cave was empty. Kale froze. No. His heart slammed against his ribs as panic surged through him. Lumens, he called embers. No answer. No sound. The cave was silent. Too silent. Kale stumbled forward, his gaze darting around. Searching. Hopping. And then, he heard it. A soft, familiar chirp. Behind him. Kale turned. And felt his breath catch. They stood at the entrance of the cave. Both of them. Alive. Awake. Lumen's glow had strengthened, its silver scales shimmering faintly in the dim light. Ember stood beside it, still weak but standing. On its own. Kale stared. You're up, he said softly. Lumen chirped. Ember huffed, a tiny puff of smoke escaping its nostrils. Kale laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. You're really not supposed to be alive, he said. But they were. And somehow, that changed everything. Kale stepped closer. Slowly, carefully. Ember didn't back away. Lumen didn't move. They simply watched him. Waiting. Kale hesitated. Then, he reached out. This time, when his hand touched them, they didn't flinch. High above, beyond the clouds, something ancient stirred. Watching, waiting, and for the first time, taking notice. The king's design. The first night after the river changed everything. Kale didn't realize it at first. To him, it was just another desperate stretch of hours. Another night spent fighting exhaustion, fear, and the constant awareness that he was far, far out of his depth. But something had shifted. Something fundamental. The hatchlings were no longer merely surviving. They were responding. The cave felt different. Warmer though the fire burned lower than before. Quieter though the world outside remained empty and still. Alive in a way Kale couldn't quite explain. He sat near the entrance, his back against the stone, his knife resting loosely in his hand. The blade had become a comfort, an illusion of control in a situation where he had very little. Across from him, Ember and Lumen rested. Not curled in weakness. Not trembling. But settled. Breathing evenly. Their small chests rose and fell in a steady rhythm that Kale hadn't heard before. You're getting stronger, he murmured. Lumen opened its eyes. The faint glow of its scales had returned, brighter now, no longer flickering like a dying ember but steady, confident. It watched him, always watching, as if measuring him, weighing something unseen. Kale exhaled slowly. I still don't understand you, he admitted. Lumen tilted its head. Ember snorted softly in its sleep, a tiny curl of smoke drifting from its nostrils. Kale smiled faintly. Yeah, he said, you either. It happened just before dawn. Kale must have dozed. Only for a moment. Just long enough for his guard to slip. He woke to warmth. Not the distant heat of the fire. Not the lingering burn of the mountains. Something closer. Something deliberate. His eyes snapped open. The cave was glowing. Soft, silver light spilled across the stone walls, casting shifting patterns that moved like water. Kale's breath caught. Illumined, the hatchling stood in the center of the cave. Its small body radiated light, not blinding, not harsh, but radiant in a way that felt almost gentle. Alive, Ember stirred beside it, letting out a low, questioning sound. Lumen chirped, a clear, ringing tone that seemed too pure for something so small. Then, the light spread. Kale felt it before he understood it. A warmth that wasn't heat. A pressure that wasn't force. Something moved through the air, through the stone, through him. It brushed against his skin like a breath. And then, it sank in. Kale gasped. Not in pains, but in shock. What is this? His heart pounded. His thoughts scattered. Because for a moment, just a moment, he felt something that wasn't his own. A presence, vast, ancient, watching. Then, it was gone. The light faded. The cave returned to shadow. Lumen blinked, the glow of its scales dimming back to its usual soft shimmer. As if nothing had happened. Kale stared. I'm losing my mind, he whispered. But deep down, he knew he was. The next morning they left the cave. They had to. The hunters would come back. Kale had no illusions about that. Men like that didn't give up easily. And once they realized what he had taken, what he was hiding, they would hunt him. Relentlessly. Kale packed what little he had. Water, food, his knife. That was all. Ember and Lumen stayed close, moving awkwardly on still-growing limbs. They couldn't fly. Not yet. But they could walk. And that was enough. For now, Kale glanced back at the cave one last time. Let's not come back, he said. Lumen chirped in agreement. Ember huffed. They traveled for 2 days. Slow, careful, avoiding open ground, avoiding signs of life. Because life meant people, and people meant danger. Kale didn't head toward any towns, any roads. Instead, he moved deeper into the wilderness, toward places where no one went unless they had no other choice. Places where secrets could survive. The hatchlings followed him without question. That was the part that unsettled him the most. They didn't try to leave. Didn't wander. Didn't resist. They stayed close. Always within reach. As if they had chosen him. Kale shook his head. Don't think about it, he muttered. He had enough problems without trying to understand dragons. On the third night, everything changed. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Kale noticed it immediately. The absence of sound. The way the air seemed to hold its breath. He stopped, raised a hand. The hatchlings stilled. What is it? He whispered. Lumen's head lifted. Its eyes narrowed. Ember shifted uneasily, a faint curl of smoke escaping its nostrils. Then, the ground trembled. Once, twice, Kale's grip tightened on his knife. That's not hunters, he said. No, this was something else. Something bigger. The trees shuddered. Leaves fell. The air grew heavy, thick with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. Kale looked up, and the world went dark. Wings, massive, endless. They blotted out the sky, stretching from horizon to horizon. A shadow passed over the forest, swallowing what little light remained. Kale's heart stopped. No, he whispered. Because he knew. Even before it descended. Even before the ground shook with its landing. He knew. The dragon was beyond anything he had imagined. Beyond anything the stories had prepared him for. It wasn't just large. It was overwhelming. A presence that bent the world around it. Its scales were black, not dull, but deep, like polished obsidian that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. Veins of molten gold pulsed beneath the surface, like fire trapped beneath stone. Its eyes burned, not with anger, not with rage, but with something far older. Something that made Kale feel small in a way he had never experienced before. Insignificant. The dragon lowered its head, and the air itself seemed to bow. Kale couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to kneel, to submit, to survive. But he didn't. He stood his ground. Barely. Because if he didn't, if he gave in, he wasn't sure he would ever stand again. The dragon's gaze fixed on him. Humans. The word wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. It echoed in his mind, clear and undeniable. Kale swallowed. Yeah, he managed, that's me. The dragon's eyes flickered. Amusement. No. Recognition. You carry what is not yours. Kale's grip tightened. The hatchlings pressed closer to him. He felt it. Their fear. Sharp, immediate, but not directed at him. At the dragons. Kale took a slow breath. They would have died, he said. The dragon tilted its head. And so you interfered. Kale met its gaze. I helped, he said. Silent, heavy, measuring. Then, the dragon moved. It stepped forward. And the world shook. Kale's knees nearly buckled, the sheer force of its presence pressing down on him like a physical weight. He clenched his jaw, forced himself to stay upright. You believe you saved them, the dragon said. Kale didn't answer, because he didn't know if that was true. The dragon's gaze shifted. To Ember, to Lumens. They stilled. Completely. Then, Lumen stepped forward. Kale's heart skipped. Illumined. The hatchling ignored him. It moved slowly, deliberately, its small body glowing faintly as it approached the massive dragon. Every instinct Kale had screamed at him to stop it, to pull it back. But he didn't, because something told him. This mattered. The dragon watched, unmoving, unblinking, as Lumen reached the edge of its shadow. Then, the hatchling chirped. The sound echoed, not just through the air, but through Kale's mind. Clear, sharp, resonant, and for a moment, the dragon froze. Its eyes widened, not in anger, not in rage, but in something else. Something Kale never expected to see in a creature like that. Recognition. Impossible, the dragon said. Kale blinked. What? The dragon's gaze snapped back to him. And for the first time, there was something new in its eyes. Not just power, not just dominance, but interest. You, it said. Kale frowned. Me what? The dragon took another step closer. You are the ones. Kale stared. I have no idea what you're talking about. The dragon's lips curled slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You will, it said. The pressure vanished. Just like that. Gone, as if it had never been there. Kale staggered, catching himself as his legs nearly gave out. What? He looked up. The dragon was already moving. Its wings spread vast and unstoppable. The air roared. Trees bent. The ground cracked. And then, it was gone, rising into the sky, disappearing into the clouds as if it had never been there. Kale stood there breathing hard, his mind struggling to catch up. What just happened? Lumen returned to his side. Ember followed, letting out a low, uncertain rumble. Kale looked down at them, at the two small creatures that had somehow drawn the attention of something like that. Yeah, he said quietly. I think we're in trouble. They didn't have to wait long for the answer. Because the next morning, the sky was filled with dragons. Kale stood at the edge of a cliff, his breath catching in his throat as he stared upward. They were everywhere. Dozens, hundreds, massive shapes circling high above, their wings cutting through the clouds like blades. The sun struggled to break through the storm of motion. Fire flickered. Roars echoed. The world felt different. Alive in a way it hadn't been before. Kale's grip tightened on the strap of his satchel. This isn't normal, he said. Lumen chirped softly. Ember shifted beside him, its gaze fixed on the sky. Then, the air changed. Again, but this time, Kale recognized it. The pressure, the weight, the presence. He didn't look up. Didn't need to. He knew. The Dragon King had returned. The massive form descended slowly, deliberately, its wings folding as it landed before him. The other dragons kept their distance. Circling, watching, waiting. Kale swallowed. You again. The dragon regarded him. And this time, there was no hostility. No threat. Only certainty. It is time, it said. Kale frowned. For what? The dragon's gaze shifted to the hatchlings. To understand. Kale's chest tightened. Understand what? The dragon leaned closer. Close enough that Kale could feel the heat of its breath. Why you were chosen. Kale's heart pounded. I wasn't chosen, he said, I just went where others would not. Kale hesitated. Yeah. Did what others would not. Yeah. Saved what others would have abandoned. Kale looked away. Yeah. Silence. Then, the dragon spoke again. And its words changed everything. You believe you saved 2 hatchlings. Kale looked back at it. Didn't I? The dragon's eyes burned. No. A pause. A breath. You saved a future. Kale felt something shift inside him. A realization. Slow, heavy, unavoidable. He looked at Ember, at Lumens, at the way they stood beside him, not behind, not hiding, but present. Strong, alive. What do you want from me? He asked. The dragon's gaze did not waver. Everything, it said. Kale let out a short, incredulous laugh. Of course you do. The dragon did not react. Because it wasn't a joke. Kale looked up at the sky, at the dragons, at the future that was unfolding whether he wanted it or not. Then, he looked back at the two hatchlings who had changed his life. Inside, oh yeah, he said. I had a feeling. High above, the dragons circled, waiting, watching, as the first step of something far greater began.